First, I'd like to address a couple things from Joseph's opening statement that haven't been addressed yet. He attempted to make the God hypothesis less plausible in a couple ways. First, he said, well, there can never, ever be sufficient evidence for an unfalsifiable hypothesis. That was his claim. I claim that that is not true. And as a counterexample, I will submit to you, consider the claim that gravity will continue functioning as normal after this debate is over. No matter what evidence any of us presents during the course of this debate, we cannot falsify the claim that gravity will continue to function as normal. And yet, I submit to you, we are rational in holding that gravity will exist later tonight, even though we can't prove it, even though we can't falsify it. Unfalsifiability is not a criterion universally by philosophers used to assess an idea. It is a luxury, it's very nice when we have it, very common in science, but a hypothesis does not need to be falsifiable to be true. He also says, God is an immaterial mind, and, quote, modern neuroscience has demonstrated that minds are physical. That was from Joseph. This would provide great evidence against the existence of a disembodied mind, but it's just not true. Thomas Nagel, an atheist philosopher, said that, quote, the existence of consciousness seems to imply that the physical description of the universe, in spite of its richness and explanatory power, is only part of the truth. David Chalmers, who has a PhD in cognitive philosophy and science, says that, quote, no explanation given wholly on physical terms can ever account for the emergence of conscious experience. A solid naturalistic understanding of conscious minds simply doesn't exist. I don't claim this is evidence for God, but it certainly fails to be an argument against him. Moving on, I'd like to cover some of the things that Joseph addressed in his rebuttal, particularly with my fine-tuning argument. He first says, well, there's tons of empty space. Our universe isn't fine-tuned for life. We would die, like, almost everywhere. First of all, this misses the entire point of the argument, which is about parallel universes. But he gives a great analogy that I would like to hijack. He said it's like looking at a dirty car and noticing this very clean spot, right? Okay, I say it's like looking at a dirty car and noticing that it's a car that can move. Okay, yes, it's dirty, but it's still designed. It's still clearly an object that was made to drive. Our universe may be dirty, so to speak. It may have space everywhere, and that is in fact necessary for life. Because, by the way, if the universe was as dense as water everywhere, it would recollapse in a matter of minutes. But just because there are empty pockets of space in places, it doesn't mean that the universe wasn't designed to sustain life. So that objection just misses the point of the argument. He also says, well, the fine-tuning argument is biocentric. Why think the universe is about life? This also kind of misses the point. I'm not trying to get into anything about divine psychology. Maybe God does love gas giants. I don't know. But if you will go back to my premises, I should have pulled them up, excuse me. But that simply misses the mark entirely. Our universe is fine-tuned for life in the sense that very few universes would support life. Design, chance, and necessity are the only three options, and that argument does nothing to improve the odds of chance or necessity. It's entirely off topic. He also says, well, this is a God of gaps argument, implying that we don't understand fine-tuning. Now, I got to meet with a PhD cosmologist named Luke Barnes, who would be very offended knowing that his area of research is not understood. We do understand fine-tuning. There are tons of papers on it. I think what you mean when you say we don't understand fine-tuning is that we don't yet have a naturalistic explanation for it. But, of course, assuming that no naturalistic explanation implies a misunderstanding is to assume that there is a natural explanation, and that's naturalism itself. On theism, we are totally justified, or even without assuming. We just don't assume naturalism or theism. We're entirely justified in trusting our design inference because we do accurately understand the physics of cosmology to the best of our ability, and that physics leads us to inference design. That's all there is to it. He also says, well, the multiverse is more plausible because Alan Guth has a little quote about everything repeating. Okay, I love Alan Guth. I'm sure he's a brilliant guy, but he's clearly stating an intuition here. He says, I find it more likely that everything repeats. That could certainly be true, but he is not speaking, he's not invoking his expertise as a cosmologist. That's not an argument in favor of the multiverse existing. He also says that the multiverse, combined with the anthropic principle, solves all of the fine-tuning issues, but it simply doesn't. I gave the example of the orderliness of the early universe, but atheist cosmologist Sean Carroll said that even among life-permitting universes, our universe is fine-tuned. It is extraordinarily larger than we would expect it to be, larger than it needs to be, just to sustain life. For every one life-permitting universe, there are 10 to the power of 122 other life-permitting universes that are not as ordered as ours. So even the selection effect does not prevent fine-tuning, does not solve all the issues. Lastly, he says, well, Boltzmann brains aren't an obstacle, and I anticipate those coming up. Okay, I wasn't really going to bring them up, but since we're here, we'll talk about it. So, Boltzmann brains are the idea that if a multiverse can fluctuate into existence and have all sorts of things, why couldn't there just be like random brains floating around? And so, instead of being a real person in a real universe, why wouldn't I just be like a brain somewhere in outer space that exists for like 0.2 seconds and then vaporizes? It's very strange, very weird philosophy, and I don't blame you if you've never heard of it, and if you want to forget about it as soon as this debate is over. But essentially, the point of the Boltzmann brain is to show that there are obstacles to any multiverse theory that it must overcome. It must match probabilistically what we see in our universe. It must be a multiverse that would produce what we see around us. And yet, that is hard to produce, as it turns out. And so you start running this very fine line where you're trying to fine-tune a multiverse. That's the point of the Boltzmann brain objection. It's not to say you can't get around it, it's to say you have to get around it. And you have to do all these other things. You have to get around all these other obstacles. Inflationary cosmology says that I'm running out of time, so I won't get into it.
I think we are out of time.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.